Hey guys, this is Kenny from LearnHowToProsper.com. Hey, and I wanted to tackle a question that I get often as a counselor and mentor, and particularly in the days when I was doing marriage counseling on a day-to-day basis. This was a question that I received most often, and that is, how do I make my girlfriend love me again, or my boyfriend, right? And so often, when a relationship begins, you're in what I call the Twitter patience stage, and in that phase, there's a lot of investment that goes into the relationship. But once you kind of get through that, in fact, I would say that all relationships kind of have this kind of a phenomenon. Where you in the beginning there's lots of excitement, there's lots of growth, there's lots of fun stuff going on. You're getting to know each other. It's all new and shiny. But then it plateaus after a time, and if you're not careful, it can actually start to go down this way. And really where you want it to go is you want this to just keep going and going and going and growing, right? So what had happened, and I saw this in this person's relationship, is they had had a very steep curve, and then they're kind of in this point right there. It's kind of where they're at in the whole scheme of things. So he was saying, well, what do we do to get past this little plateau and start to move forward in that up and to the right direction that we all want to be? And it's kind of interesting because we live in fascinating times with respect to how we view relationships. And I would say that that to a large extent in today's world, and even when I went through my own graduate program in counseling, did a lot of counseling, people would talk about basically your needs. Everything was kind of focused on you. You got to make sure your needs are being met. Don't misunderstand me. I think that there's an element of that, but if that's your first priority, I think you're going to run into a lot of problems. So here's what I suggested to this individual, is that instead of everything being focused on your needs, and by nature we are selfish people, so if we just kind of go with the flow, that's what's going to happen. What we need to do instead is focus on the needs of others. You look outside yourself, right? And particularly here, you want to focus almost exclusively on the needs and interests of the individual. Now, there's this magic law called reciprocity, and the fact of the matter is that if you focus your energies on that person, then over time, reciprocity will come back. And what's interesting is, in many cases, the very thing that you sought to change most in your partner or spouse does evolve over time when you actually focus on their needs and not your own. Let me give you an example. I have one individual, I just was speaking to him this last week, and he was talking about how he got a valuable piece of advice from his grandfather when he was at his reception line at his marriage. And basically what his father said was, or his grandfather, he said, just do one thing. Just do the dishes. Oh, good. My package arrived. I'm so happy. He said, just do one thing. Just do the dishes. If you'll just do the dishes, he says, you'll be amazed at what that will do in your relationship. So I asked him about that, and he said, he kind of forgot about that piece of advice. And after about 5 years, and their marriage had kind of gotten to a pretty steady plateau, and there were so many things that he wanted to see change in her. He remembered that piece of advice, and basically it wasn't so much the act of actually washing the dishes, but what it signified was that he cared about her enough to dedicate some of his time and focus on something that would allow her to have a little bit of a break, right? And that's just one example, and that's pretty traditional. I don't mean to be stereotypical. There are lots of different things that could happen that way, but this was just that example. So this is the advice that I gave to him. I said, Chris, I want you to forget about yourself, and I want you to focus, because we all have this, right? When we come into relationships, we all have these expectations for what we think the other ought to do, and some of the times we don't even recognize what those expectations are. And so we can get into this place where our expectations aren't being met, and then we start to get frustrated, and then the relationship starts to go down the other direction. So oftentimes those expectations, of course, are all based on you and what you're thinking about yourself and your needs and me and myself and I. And so if you will instead focus on maybe one of the expectations that your partner or spouse has for you, and then focus just on that one thing. And it's not so much the thing that you're doing, but what it signifies, right? So in this particular case, his companion, she was very, very, she's a rancher. And in her way of thinking, if he truly loved her, he would spend some time with her in the evenings working by her side on the ranch. And they're just newly formed, coming together, and so he's not accustomed to working on a ranch. He wakes up early, she wakes up a little bit later. And so what I suggested to him was, well, why don't you pick one thing that you can do that really means a lot to her? And even if that was maybe just spending one night, out helping her feed the cows. And if he would focus on that and give that experiment a little bit of a genuine test, see what would happen with respect to their relationship. Well, he did just that, and of course she was delighted to see that he was spending a little bit of time and interest. Well, he's a motorcycle racer, and so one of the things that he likes to do is wake up early in the morning and he watches these bike races on a subscription that he has on his computer. So he'll go into the internet and he'll log in and watch these races. Well, one morning he notices after, it's been like a week or two later, he notices that she's up and walking around, and she actually came in and sat down, had her little breakfast there, and sat there with him while he was watching the races. And like you said, it wasn't so much that she was willing to watch the race, it was what it meant, right? It was the meaning behind the action. So that is the one principle, I would say. If there's one thing that we ought to consider here when we're talking about how do you make your girlfriend love you again? Well, when you're first married, or when you're first engaged, when you're first coming to know somebody during this phase of the relationship, there's so much investment really in the other person, right? You're thinking about them, you're constantly trying to help them in certain ways. And then after a while, when you get up to here, and if you'll watch this peak, and you'll get to this point where all of a sudden you're not thinking about them, you're thinking about yourself. And when you get to that point, that's when it plateaus. So keep doing what you were doing here and maintain that, and your relationship will go like this, and your sense of fulfillment and care, and even the depth of your relationship will grow over time. So that's my advice for today. And with that, I'm going to sign off. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one. Oh, and by the way, if you like this video, go ahead and click on the thumbs up button below, and click on any of the links in the description box to follow my blog over at learnhowtoprosper.com. And with that,